Google's self-driving cars no longer have a case of senioritis. They've graduated. Joining us to talk about this is Mike Murphy from Quartz. How's it going, Mike?
Not too bad. How you doing?
Awesome. It's great to have you here. So Google's cars are no longer considered moonshots. Tell us a little bit about the transition out of Google's X division.
So they're now going to be part of a separate standalone company under Alphabet called Waymo, which in the day that we've had this, I keep confusing them with Waymo, the IoT plug company, and that's very confusing for my Alexa, which keeps turning my lights off when I'm talking about.
Wow, I just thought that was your iris, like auto irising, but no, your lights are actually going off. So transitioning away from Google X into its own kind of division of Alphabet called Waymo. What kind of pressure does this place on Waymo now that they're not in the warm embrace of Google X? It seems like this year, we've seen both sides of this. Many of these companies kind of going out on their own, and then many of these companies realizing like they're being cut back because things just aren't developing as rapidly as they need to, or they're not making money. Same pressures here?
Yeah, I think it's a weird one. I mean, because of exactly what you just said. I mean, you've got companies that Google or Alphabet has pushed out, whether it's like Verily, their life sciences division, or Nest, which is its own division, and Fiber as well, that have all kind of struggled to live up to their grand promises so far. That's not to say they won't, but over the course of 2016, they haven't necessarily any of them really shown any of that promise yet. So I do wonder if this is going to be another case of a grand promise, a really, really, really big promise. I mean, it was originally founded on the idea that the original engineer on the product was like, I don't want my kids to have driver's licenses, and his kids are in their teens now, or early teens. So it's like, are we really going to have this technology in a viable fashion that this company can start marketing to people in the next few years? Is that better achieved as its own company? Probably, but I'm still not convinced that this is not just another hubristic move by Alphabet.
Those poor kids are never going to get driver's licenses. I feel bad for them. So the new regulations say that they'll be given permission for licenses. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but people who make car makers, like automakers, will be given the right to test self-driving cars, where just software makers will not be given the rights to test self-driving cars. So do you think that Google is going to become an actual car maker, or do you think they'll still remain just like a software inside the self-driving car?
So this is like a real weird issue right now, and this sprung up last week when Michigan changed their laws on self-driving cars to make them more permissive, and a bunch of places were reporting that software companies and the like wouldn't be able to get in there. But Google responded to me saying, "Well, we're actually already a car manufacturer as far as the NTSB and the National Highway Safety Administration are concerned. So they have built their cars. They are a car manufacturer of record as far as they're concerned. I'm not entirely sure what the specifics for like what counts as becoming a car manufacturer. Like, do you have to be like Ford or Tesla, or can you just build car products? And I think that needs to be clarified. But I do think that to some degree, they're going to keep making cars. Like, they're not going to necessarily make any of these little koala cars that they're showing in these videos. But they are entering the partnership with Fiat Chrysler. They are building out a fleet of Pacific minivans. I don't know why they chose minivans, but like they have committed to that. So I've got to believe that, like, if they're not car manufacturers in the sense that they are starting a car from the ground up, they're definitely starting one from, very far along, more than like, how Android is related to a smartphone. This is more like somewhere between a Nexus phone and a Samsung phone, as it were.
What about this kind of ride-sharing plan that they have with Fiat Chrysler? Like, obviously, like you're talking about, Google's really focusing on a partnership here. as opposed to kind of building out its fleet. In this case, it's really a partnership with Fiat and Chrysler, and they've said that's kind of going to be their approach going forward. How does that kind of pertain to this ride sharing plan? And when will we see these, competing against Uber out on the roads?
I mean, it's a good question. They seem to have been a little wishy-washy in terms of like hard deadlines. I know that the cars are supposed to be ready next year. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to enter any kind of like wide service next year. And I mean, even the ones that like Uber have right now are on very specific routes in like what they perceive to be safer parts of Pittsburgh. And the other tests that are happening, like the one that Volvo is going to do in Gothenburg next year, again, is going to be on very safe roads as far as they're aware. So I could see Google doing something like that, or Waymo doing Waymo. One of them is IoT.
One of them, whatever.
Doing something like that in the near future. But I think it's going to be with these kind of partnerships. I mean, I think it makes sense to leverage companies that have hundreds of years worth of car manufacturing expertise behind them, because at the end of the day, Google has struggled to build, IoT devices with Nest, let alone the kind of infrastructural challenges associated with building cars on their own. I mean, they've struggled with Nest, and Motorola didn't exactly work out so well for them. So I wonder how much they could actually do completely on their own.
Sure.
Now, some people have speculated that Google or suggested Google buy Lyft. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it could be an answer. I mean, as we've seen, these big money purchases that Google has made recently haven't exactly worked out. But Lyft has the partnership with GM and the heavy investment from GM. So I don't know how that would gel with, what Google seems to be developing with Fiat Chrysler. They're, the two of the three biggest car manufacturers in the U.S. But I do think, if the answer is to make an autonomous ride hailing app and service, it's going to be a lot easier to buy something that could provide that logistical infrastructure than to make it from the ground up. That being said, they already own Waze and Google Maps, which are two of the best tools out there for kind of getting people around and knowing where accidents are and knowing where roads are, and Google Street View and all that sort of stuff. So they do have building blocks more than probably a lot of other companies that could just try to jump into this sort of thing.
So they showed off at an event. They showed off a man who was blind riding in one of the Google cars. He was the only one in the car, and and he was speaking about his experience and how this really made him feel like a whole person, not having to depend on anyone else to get him anywhere. And I thought that was great and wonderful, and one of the side effects of having autonomous cars. But you could do that now, right? I mean, you could call a cab. I mean, how is it different?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a kind of like very Silicon Valley thing to do, of like, here is the best perfect example in a utopian society of like what our technology could be used for. But yeah, I mean, if I go, hey Siri, call me an Uber, oh, she's going to do it.
Uh-oh. Siri, abort. Stand down, Siri. Stand down.
Well, like, you could do the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're blind or if you've got 20/20 vision. So I kind of think that like tugging on the heartstrings of putting a blind man in your launch video is a little much. That being said, like, it definitely opens, like, other people in that video, they had like young kids who were on their own playing, and like a family that was out or something. And like the ability to call a car without like a kid probably wouldn't have a credit card, or maybe your car broke down or something. Like the true freedom of cars that are always moving around and always available and know exactly where you want to go without having to deal with people is kind of interesting. But like, I remember the first time I ever used Uber, I was in Seattle on a beach, and I'd fallen in the ocean and I was soaking wet, and I called a car to come out of nowhere and save me. I mean, that was like kind of amazing. And we've had that technology for like 6-7 years now. And it was kind of weird. I don't know why I went in the ocean. But like, we've had that ability for a while. And the only thing that they're adding on here would be the ability to have these cars kind of always in motion. The second that it's dropped off, it doesn't have to like worry about finding another fare. It's just moving until it's got, an optimal route based on where it is at any given time and something like that. But like, that's so far away in terms of like what, especially in like a city like New York, like that logistically could happen, that I feel like something like Uber and something that's not autonomous is far more likely to be how we like call cars wherever we are for the next few years.
Yeah, right. So finally, in kind of related news, the U.S. Department of Transportation today proposed a rule that would require vehicles to talk to each other for collision avoidance and other safety reasons. Tell us a little bit about why that's essential. And does this apply to only autonomous vehicles, or is it kind of all vehicles going forward in the cars of the future?
So I believe this is going to be for all vehicles. And it is something that the DOT has been talking about for a while as kind of like one of those requirements that really does make sense. And I think it's pretty smart. I think that having machines talk to each other makes a lot of sense in terms of like, yeah, it's great that you've made a car that is so good, or, any kind of robot that's so good at knowing exactly where it is in the world. But like, instead of it having to try and guess everything, wouldn't it be great if it knew what every other, device around it was doing? Like, I think it would be great if it knew that this truck is changing lanes or is going to change lanes in 200 feet, or if like that stoplight is actually about to turn red or something like that. I feel like that kind of information could only help cars manage where they are on the road. I think it's a pretty smart idea.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Mike Murphy with Quartz, always a pleasure getting you on the show, man. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.